Minnesota sports fans, to another edition of Vikings on SI. Jonathan Harrison here, joined alongside Will Ragatz. Will, a busy day for the Minnesota Vikings. We kind of previewed it yesterday on the YouTube channel, and now here it is, roster cut day. The Vikings have officially gotten down to a 53-man roster, and the biggest note of the day, Lewis Cine, the first-round pick from 2022, Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah's first ever draft pick for the Vikings, was cut just after 2 years and 10 defensive plays. Your immediate thoughts on the Vikings parting ways with a first-round pick just 2 years after taking him?
Yeah, it's not great. Nobody wants this to happen when the Vikings draft a guy in the first round, and it was a tough situation for Cine with the injury his rookie year that I think really kind of affected things and his development and just his progress in the NFL. And then he also happened to, the very next year, have a new defensive coordinator come in that he wasn't drafted to play in Brian Flores' system. And then he happens to play in like the deepest safety room in the NFL, where they have three really good guys. And Theo Jackson, their fourth safety, has emerged and looks like a player who would start on a lot of teams. So it's just the Vikings then, drafted Jay Ward, this new regime, finding another young guy last year. And for Lewis Cine, this isn't really surprising. He had the nice game in the second preseason game against the Browns where you thought, okay, that looks promising. He was flying around, making plays, looking like Georgia Lewis Cine. Maybe he's going to make the roster. Maybe there's something there. And then it seems like that may have just been kind of a one-time thing because he didn't do a whole lot in the final preseason game against the Eagles. The Vikings apparently tried to trade him and couldn't even really get that done. So now he's probably going to just end up with a fresh start somewhere else, which I think could be good for him. Like I wouldn't be shocked if Cine, finds something somewhere else. I don't know if he's going to get claimed on waivers because then the Vikings would be off the hook for his $4 million in guaranteed money left on his first round rookie contract. They're probably going to have some dead money on there, and then Cine will just sign with somebody else, but we'll see.
Speaking of Cine and the 2022 draft class, guys like Brian Asamoah and Caleb Evans were rumored, and we talked about them yesterday, possibly being on that bubble of being cut. They ended up making the roster. Are you surprised by those guys making the roster, or could they just be kind of placeholders while the front office looks through the rest of the league at the other cuts and they could be the first to go?
Yeah, it's possible. I was a little bit surprised. I didn't have either of those guys making it in my final 53-man roster prediction, just because that kind of seemed like where the buzz was going. But Brian Asamoah makes it probably as the fourth out of four linebackers. Dallas Gant, the undrafted rookie, who I thought outplayed Asamoah in training camp in the preseason, he'll potentially be a practice squad guy. And then Caleb Evans makes it quite possibly as the seventh out of seven cornerbacks, which is more than you usually see a team keep. If you're counting Jay Ward as a cornerback and not a safety, that is, they kept seven corners. So yeah, with Evans and Asamoah, there's still some upside there from what they've shown over the past couple of years, but it's just been a lot of inconsistency, a lot of kind of struggling to move up the depth chart. So it would not shock me if their spots are not super set in stone as we head into the start of the regular season.
The other surprising note from today, Kene Nwangwu was cut by the Vikings, kind of the kick return specialist. Struggled over the past couple years to break into Kevin O'Connell's offense. Had the injuries last year, of course, but when he did get back and was healthy, he just really didn't find a spot in the offense. Is that the reason why he was cut, or is that another just kind of out of left field surprise move for you?
This was the biggest surprise of the day, and Cine is the biggest name that was cut today, I would say. But Cine wasn't super surprising to me because we had thought for a while that this guy probably wasn't going to make the roster just because he had been hurt in training camp. He was buried on the depth chart. Kene Nwangwu, I never really considered for a second not making the cut in the 53-man roster because they got rid of Dwayne McBride and Mo Ibrahim, who were always long shots. They cut Myles Gaskin, which we expected. But then they cut Nwangwu too. Now they only have two running backs on the roster, in Aaron Jones and Ty Chandler. And obviously that's going to change and fluctuate, and maybe they'll have practice squad guys that they can elevate because you got to have more than two running backs. But yeah, with Nwangwu, he showed some burst during training camp. He had the 48-yard touchdown back when J.J. McCarthy was still playing in the preseason opener against the Raiders. Finished, I think, with like 8 yards per carry throughout the preseason. And it was surprising to me because this is a guy who, I mean, technically he's a former All-Pro. He had 2 kickoff return touchdowns as a rookie. He had another one in 2022. So it's interesting to me that he's not here. It clearly means the Vikings want to look elsewhere, I suppose, for their third running back. Or maybe it was just kind of some roster manipulation where they wanted to keep more guys elsewhere and they feel like they can get Nwangwu or Gaskin or whoever on their practice squad. It also could have something to do with the new kickoff format where Nwangwu was really valuable in the old kickoff format. Although last year he didn't do a whole lot because it seems like teams nowadays can kind of just kick it through the end zone every time. So he didn't get a ton of opportunities last year. But now it's a completely different format, and maybe the Vikings don't feel like he's a good fit for that. I'm not sure, but it is surprising to me that Kene Nwangwu is not on the roster in the final year of his rookie deal.
Yeah, I think that's the one that surprises me the most because, as you said there at the end, that he was a kickoff return specialist, and it seemed like that might have played with how this new kickoff return kind of incentivizes teams to kick to the other team and let them bring the ball out instead of just kicking it through the back of the end zone. It just seemed
You
like,
would think
yeah,
that his role would have gone back up in that phase, but I don't know.
yeah, very surprising move there. Another note for the Vikings in these cuts, and you can read all of Will's thoughts and 5 reactions to the Viking roster cut down on Vikings on SI right now. Do the Vikings have another UDFA success story? Dwight McGlothern makes the roster out of camp in a suddenly veteran-laden cornerback room that we went into training camp worrying about this room, looking at this room and thinking, who's going to make this? Who's going to be the starter? Now it's all veterans and Dwight McGlothern.
Yeah, and it's like I think like you set it up. It's another potential success story for Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, who has had his fair share of ups and downs in the draft. I think would be fair to characterize some struggles in the 2022 draft. Jordan Addison looks good, but maybe there's not a whole lot else from last year's draft. And then this year, I would still obviously it's still too soon to know. But what Kwesi has done is supplemented those picks well with undrafted free agents. It was Ivan Pace Jr. last year and a couple other guys last year. Andre Carter and Najee Thompson made the roster as rookies. I mean, Pace just an absolute steal. I'm not suggesting that Dwight McGlothern is going to be on that level because he doesn't have the same path to playing time as a rookie that Pace did last year, where all he had to do was come in and beat out Brian Asamoah. McGlothern is in a room that has Stephon Gilmore and Shaq Griffin and Byron Murphy and Fabian Moreau and Caleb Evans, like we mentioned, he's still there. But I think long term, just from what I've seen from McGlothern, this looks to be a guy who has some real potential down the line with his playmaking ability, his ball skills. He can play some man coverage. He's not the biggest guy, but he's not small either. So I think the Vikings really liked him. They had the connection where he played under their DBs coach, Durante Jones at LSU before he transferred to Arkansas. So yeah, McGlothern could be a definite name to keep an eye on moving forward. And he's not the only one who made it. Taki Taimani, the nose tackle out of Oregon, also made this roster as an undrafted free agent. So kind of a testament to the Vikings front office and their scouting staff for what they've been able to do after the draft the last couple of years.
Sticking along the UDFA lines, Minnesota put Gabriel Murphy on short-term IR. Is that a sign that, though we didn't see much of him in training camp preseason, that they clearly saw enough that they wanted to try and keep him on the roster, or is there something else there that they placed him on short-term IR?
No, it is. You're absolutely right. And I'm just talking about the undrafted free agents. And Murphy was the guy who was the biggest name that they signed. I mean, right away after the draft, when they signed their undrafted rookies, you're like, okay, Gabriel Murphy filled it up at UCLA. And he looks like he has a chance to be maybe a Pace type of steal because it's the same profile where you're super productive in college, super athletic, but there's just size concerns. Pace was really undersized and still is for an inside linebacker. Clearly, he was able to overcome that last year as a rookie. Gabriel Murphy has really short arms for an NFL edge rusher, and that can be a real hindrance when you're trying to beat tackles off the edge. But a good football player, a great athlete, really productive in college, and I do think the Vikings spoke highly of him from what we've heard. I think they saw enough from him to really want to keep him around and see what he can become in the future, which is why they used one of just 2 of those IR spots. You have 2 spots that you can use where a player is on short-term IR and designated to be able to come back after 4 games. They went Dalton Reisner and they went Gabriel Murphy there. And they were able to do that by putting TJ Hawkinson on the PUP list. So I do think that they have some real kind of belief in what Gabriel Murphy could be down the line.
Last note from me, wide receivers, the Vikings keeping 6 of them. Tristan Jackson and Trent Sherfield rounding out the 6 receivers. The other 4, Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, Jalen Naylor, Brandon Powell. Are we surprised it was those 2 guys, or did you expect that? Are we surprised Lucky Jackson didn't make the list?
No, I think that was pretty expected. That was the 6 that I had, and I think most people had in the final predictions. Obviously, the top 4 were locks. Brandon Powell was going to make this team. Jalen Naylor was really one of the stars of the summer in training camp and the preseason. He's going to be the number 3 receiver. And then Jackson, another star of the summer, had a great camp, great preseason, led the NFC in receiving touchdowns in the preseason. So it seemed like there was a good chance he was going to make it. And it also seemed like there was a good chance Trent Sherfield was going to make it because of his veteran experience, his ability as a run blocker. So not surprised that those were the 6 the Vikings kept. I do think they will really try to get guys like Lucky Jackson, Jashawn Jones, maybe Thayer Thomas onto the practice squad as well, because you can never have too much depth at that wide receiver position.
Overall thoughts then on the initial 53-man roster for Minnesota. What does this say about what they expect to do this season?
I think they have high internal expectations, and obviously the expectations externally are not particularly high. I think their projected win total is 6.5 at most sports books, and people aren't giving them much of a chance to do things this year with Sam Darnold at quarterback, and that's understandable. But I do think the Vikings have a lot of internal belief in their coaching staff, in their pieces, their high-end talent at a lot of positions, their veteran experience at a lot of positions, and then I think they believe in what Sam Darnold can do in the best situation he's ever been in a Kevin O'Connell offense, throwing to Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison and TJ Hawkinson once all those guys are healthy, and you got Aaron Jones in the backfield. So, I mean, specific to the 53-man roster, I don't know that anything they did today tells us a ton about this season. I thought like the Lewis Cine and Kene Nwangwu were the 2 biggest names they cut. There were a few surprises here and there. You had Jalen Redmond was another defensive tackle who made the roster as a kind of cool underdog story coming out of the UFL and turning heads in preseason. But bigger picture with the regular season coming up, which we'll talk about plenty on this channel right here, I do think the Vikings believe that they can make some noise this year in what's going to be a really tough NFC North division.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. Will, good stuff from you today. Go read Will's work and the rest of the Bring Me the Sports team's work over at Vikings on SI, Twins on SI, Gophers, Timberwolves on SI, and Badgers on SI as well. Minnesota sports fans, we'll talk to you tomorrow.